everyone, welcome to the SFFCon Fantasy World Building panel. I'm going to let everyone introduce themselves, but I am Christina Gruhl, author of the In Blood and Fire series, and I'm going to turn it over to Martha and then Jeffrey and Alan.
Hi everybody, I'm Martha Carr, co-creator of the Orsaran universe. It's got about 200 books at this point, and it's going strong. You're muted, Jeffrey.
Sorry. Hi, everyone. I'm Jeffrey Alcohonic. I'm an epic fantasy author with, 17 published novels. My Acelia series and Wizardom series, multiple series in both worlds. Yep.
And hi, I'm Alan Stroud. I'm a university academic and a science fiction and fantasy writer. I thought I was going to be a fantasy writer, and then it turns out that people like my science fiction. But the things that I've done more recently, I have a PhD in fantasy and science fiction world design, and I've worked on several computer games in terms of their designing worlds. And I'm also, as of next year, I will be the new author of the Historical Guide to Fantasy Literature, which the last edition was in 2009. So I'll be doing the 2022 edition for Rowman and Littlefield.
Awesome. Well, as you all know, we have a couple of, we've been tossing around a few questions in our email thread. I'm going to do a round robin. I'm going to steal from our last panel, Jeffrey, and do a little bit of a round robin. So let's start with Martha. Where do you start your world building? Do you start it with your magical elements, or just the different types of technology in your world, or do you start with the culture and then build from there?
So I start with the culture. As a matter of fact, I like to watch those peculiar shows about, was it the pyramids or Egyptians, or was it aliens, those kind of shows, because they cover a lot of old history, but they have weird twists, and it just gets my brain going. And so from there I create the culture, because that's the framework. It instructs how the characters are going to behave, what's possible in the plot. I'm really not sure how you would do it if you don't understand the very, very basic rules first.
What about you, Jeffrey?
Yeah, so I kind of start with, I look at the history that I want the world to have, right? So I have to think back, like, how it got to where it's going to be in the point in the story. And then that really impacts everything. In fact, like with my current series, it impacted the geographical element. So a map came based on what happened in history, right? So everything dovetails off of the history.
Hey, Stephen, glad you could join us. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself real quick.
Hey, sorry about that. I was having technical issues with my internet connection. My name is Stephen Landry. I am a lit RPG, sci-fi, and fantasy author. I'm probably best known for Stardivers and the Temple of the Storm series that I co-author with Robbie Below, and the Vampire Sorcerer series that I co-author with Alex Etzios.
So we are right now discussing where you start with your world building. Do you start with your magical elements, your technology, or do you start with the cultures in your world?
I typically actually start with the cultures and lore. I mean, when I first start, I actually start with figuring out the characters and what their motivations are going to be, and plotting from there, and then building around it. But I typically dive heavily into the lore of my worlds, like ancient history, magical elements like that.
And what about you, Alan?
Issues.
Oh, I'm sorry, you paused there. You were cutting out, and I thought you'd finished.
So I actually, while I was doing my PhD, I did I worked on two specific computer games, which were the kind of case studies of my work. The first one was Elite Dangerous, which is the online MMO space combat simulator. And the second one was Chaos Reborn, which is a kind of small kind of battle chess game, a turn-based strategic summoning game where you summon all sorts of fantasy creatures to destroy the opposing wizard. And in both of those instances, I built on some work I did in my master's, which was this idea of something called the point of departure and the point of origin. So the point of departure is the point that you identify the story beginning at. And the point of origin is where all the elements that you have identified that are components of the story, it's where they all originate. So that might be if you are writing a kind of creation mythology that you want to attach to your world, so you're writing a Silmarillion style book, then you might want to go all the way back to, to the first days and how the world was made and so on and so forth. But you don't need to. The origin has to kind of codify from the story that you're choosing to tell, because otherwise, it can be very useful to know some of the background and the history, and that can kind of inform and give you confidence as a writer. But if it's not going to feature in the text, then actually it sort of has a little bit of a redundancy to it in terms of the way in which it works.
It also isn't a valuable use of your time. If it's something you're never going to use.
Well, you do use it. It gives you, and I don't know if you find this, and I don't know if the others find this, but I do find that when writers have done their world building, when they've done the work, then it stops you being. I've written stuff in the past where I've been hesitant in the text, and when you read it back on your second edit or your run through, and you're going, he's spending so much time kind of prevaricating. He clearly hasn't thought about what this means, and how this works, because he's spending so much time dawdling over the ideas. And actually, if you've worked that out beforehand, then that helps make sure your writing has pace and confidence.
So go ahead.
Sorry. Also, if you're creating a universe that you might have others writing in, you really need to know the base super well. So Order Saren, all of it was created. Not all of it was mentioned, right? Because the reader doesn't need. But that meant that we were consistent. We knew what to I knew what to reference when. And then when somebody new came in, there was a basic set of rules.
Yeah, so for Elite Dangerous, it was for the computer game itself. It was then for about 13 tie-in stories that were being released at similar times, plus an anthology of short stories, and then there was an RPG, and then there was actually 2 RPGs, but all of those had to kind of have that kind of synchronicity. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And one of the things I did was talked about how the macro text, i.e. the text of the fictional universe, the one that sits behind the published texts, how that has to stay updated. And it has to be a living document, because when you publish something, you got to go back and update it, because otherwise you lose your place, don't you?
Yeah, we were talking in a panel I did earlier about like a Bible for your stories, and that sounds pretty similar.
Yeah, people talk about world canons and Bibles, and I kind of, when I was doing the academic study, I avoided the kind of religious iconography element, specifically because actually sometimes when you look at the style of prose, that can be quite confusing too. If you take something like any version of the Christian Bible, and you look at that and then you compare the opening and the Silmarillion, there's actually a prose link. The two things sound the same. The fact that it's the Valar inventing Middle Earth, or the Arda, isn't it? But Tolkien is clearly using similar kind of mythic craft, and the two things resonate. And the same with you could look at Livy's History of Rome. There's some similarities there, some similarities in Hesiod, in other classical texts. So I kind of tried to avoid those specific terms because of the fact that it was it was a kind of a critical and a more of a dry study.
Yeah, I have kind of a bit of a haphazard encyclopedia. I have a bunch of documents in a folder that are all things that I need for my world, like the language that I've made up and different the magic, the magic system and all that stuff. So my next question would be, when do you build your world, do you fully flesh it out, or flesh it out as much as you can? Because we all know as writers, when you're writing, things evolve. You might think of something later on that you didn't think of when you were first building your world. But do you do as much groundwork as you can building your world before you start writing, or do you build the world as you write? We'll start with Alan this time.
Tricky one in that. So I've got a paper coming out later this year called Glimpse Morsels for the Imagination, which sounds such a strange title, but it advocates a type of world building that isn't systemization, because I'm not a systemizer, as in I don't like systemization or systemification of certain aspects of fantasy writing. One of the reasons I don't like it is that I think there is a partiality that's needed, because when you're writing a book, you're in an imaginative partnership with a reader, and the reader, you'll probably never meet them, but you get your chance to say something, in your document, and then they, months later might be reading on the toilet, or they might be reading in bed, or they might be reading it, somewhere else that you're not privy to, but they are co-creating the world in their own imagination. You get to put some signifiers in there. They get to co-create. And I always found as a child that the greatest worlds were the ones that when I put the book down, they stayed in my head. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things I think is incredibly important is that the writer leaves room for the reader's imagination and instigates the reader's imagination. So if I indicate that there's a tree on a hill, then if it matters that the tree has 6 branches plot-wise or something else, then it's got 6 branches. But if it doesn't, then your tree and my tree can be very different, and that's okay. It's actually all right to think that way. So in terms of what you were saying about how exhaustively I plan, I try and leave room, if that makes sense. So I'm trying not to, and this is part of, I know I've just advocated, working it all out and having that confidence in your writing, but actually over a period of time, I've kind of started to plan a little bit less to try and make sure that when I write the text, it leaves a little bit of imaginative room for the reader in place.
What about you, Jeffrey?
And actually, I totally agree with what Alan just said too, because in the end, like we as writers, it's kind of like we're a director, and the characters, they might be the actors, but because everybody sees a different, performance, and all you're doing is you're just directing and like letting these stick figures, these characters, play out the plot for people. Right? So yeah, you want to leave room for them to use their own imagination, but at the same time, like culture is going to be very important, and in different countries or different nations are going to have different cultures, and it's important to understand and define these things up front, I think. And then if magic is a big part of your world, the magic system should be integral to all that, because magic would, just like technology does today, it impacts culture, right? You look at third world nations, their culture is different for many reasons, but technology is a big part of it, and and the culture changes as technology impacts it. Same thing with magic. So you have to define these things up front, so you know what you're going to see. But I think just in general, what I try to do with my stories and my worlds is I try to keep a lot of things that are familiar. I write epic fantasy, so people come in with an expectation. And what I do is I really focus on the things that I want to be unique, make those unique, and just make the other things, the things that don't matter to my storytelling, familiar. So an inn is going to be an inn in one of my worlds, just like it was in Tolkien stories or Jordan's or anybody. And
Yeah.
all those inns are basically the same. They're established. People know, oh, I go to the inn, there's a tap room, I can check in, I can sleep for the night, right? But the magic system or the gods and how it all works together, those unique things are what you want to really pay attention to.
Yes, I totally agree with that. What about you, Martha?
I'm going to kind of build on what everybody else has already said. The magic system, you have to also decide, is the magic visible? Everybody knows about it, or is it hidden? And I write urban fantasy, so maybe that gives me a little bit of a head start because the rules of Earth still apply. It's just I'm implying that magic is all around, whether or not humans realize it or not. And then my goal is to let the reader be able to see it in their imagination very clearly. And Ann Tyler has always said that you use one or two very distinct, like her example was somebody brushing chalk on their hands before doing the uneven bars. And that just kind of sets the mood. So, one or two clever descriptions can help place the reader in the scene. And if chosen well, can also set the tone. And that helps everything else come alive without having to go on and on and on.
Can I be a tiny bit contrary and pick up something here? Why do you need to systemize magic?
I think the definition of systemizing magic needs to be set. So I start with basic rules, like in the Lyra Chronicles, magic is hidden. So that's a given. Most won't know about it. But from there, I don't know that it becomes systemized over the course of 200 books. It's become somewhat systemized, but it didn't really start that way.
I think the reason I'm asking is that if we think about sort of common parlance in our world, often what we define as magic is that which cannot be explained.
Yes.
And that which cannot be defined. And so it strikes me as somewhat ironic that, and I absolutely caveat this in that I am in this camp as well, in that I have systemized magic in fantasy as well with different works. But it strikes me as somewhat ironic that we systemize magic when magic is the definition of a term of something that we can't explain.
Well, also, at least in what I write, magic is what a creature naturally can do. So it's their skill, and it's the thing they were born with, and it's natural to them. It's just not natural maybe to the humans, which is why urban fantasy is so fun, because you always have that clash of what the hell.
I do think that there needs to be, rules to a magic system. There has to be limits. It can't be limitless.
Yeah.
And that's what I make sure I know what the limits of magic are in my world.
Yeah, I think a cost as well, limits and a cost. And I will say, I have books where, like for wizards, because wizards train, they go to universities, they study, so it's very systematic. But the sorcerers, intentionally very vague and mysterious magic, right? I know the rules and limitations, but I don't expose those to the readers. They just see certain things, and you can keep it mysterious. But I think it depends on the narrative. I mean, because the wizards, if they're going to university to train, by nature, it's a systematic thing, right?
See,
yeah, Corey. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, you can, we can kind of go back to Tolkien a little bit if we want to sort of look at a guide in that regard. Some aspects of Tolkien, if you look at the chapters around the Mines of Moria, you've got Gandalf talking about what he was trying to do. And he talks about shutting spells on doors, and he talks about, kind of some ideas around his kind of mechanics. But then if you look at the chapter where Bilbo is persuaded to put the ring down, Gandalf seems to loom into the room. He gets bigger, and it is not defined. You have a very threatening persona, a persona who is attempting to intimidate in that moment. Fairly similar with Galadriel, actually. Later on in Lothlorien, you've got a persona that is attempting to intimidate, and actually, it is all the more all the richer for the fact that the reader doesn't understand the systemification of what's there.
Right,
Now,
but it's also acceptable because it doesn't violate anything that came before.
No, true, and I absolutely agree. Cost, utterly crucial. I think that that's an absolute good way to think about things, because you can't have, we can't have stories. I don't think people enjoy stories where there isn't cost, where there isn't, if people don't earn things and there isn't, it isn't worthwhile. I did say to people, somebody once, that, you could write a story about people sat in a waiting room and then someone walks in and says, "You've won the lottery." And then the story ends, but they haven't earned anything, you go like, well, what was the point of that? It's nice, but what was the point? So I do agree that cost is absolutely crucial, but I do think that there is we do need to question ourselves as to why we systemize and what systemification is for.
So we have a couple of comments on that. Stephen couldn't get his video and audio to work, so he's not going to be joining us. But Corey says, needs to be systemized to set the rules for the system in order to not create contradictions later. Systemize equals rules for the characters. So what are your thoughts on that, guys?
I think as you build, like I said, Order Saren has about 200 books in it so far. And just by that nature, you're going to have rules because of what's already occurred. And then if somebody's writing in the universe and they have an idea, we just need to check with what's happened to make sure it doesn't fly in the face of. If it does fly in the face of and they really want to do it, then we have to figure out why it makes sense. So it's not impossible, but if you're going to build a universe, or as opposed to a world, just a universe where it keeps going and others are involved, the rules will occur whether you like it or not, and they should, because the reader will come to rely on them.
See, I was right with you right up until the last bit.
Well, I say that because of the fan feedback that I get constantly.
Sure.
This belongs more to them at this point than it does to me, and they bring up the rules to me. So whether I like it or not, it matters to them.
Well, I'll just kind of come in at that very briefly in terms of what's there. So I absolutely agree with the collaboration. Totally agree with the collaboration. There is a need for rules, and there is a need for for consistency in terms of the elements that's there. In terms of the readers, is it a case of their interpretation of the rules?
No,
or the rules?
I'd say I would say not an interpretation. I mean, sometimes of course it's that, and you kind of look at it, see if there's anything to it, possibly ignore it. But a lot of the time, they are keeping really good track I don't know how they do it, but they're keeping really good track.
Yeah.
And if you break it, you genuinely have broken a rule, they are going to be the first to point it out and tell you what page number and where you did it. And they have a legitimate point.
And cite why it's a broken rule and where they got the rule from.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah. And I've been, I've had readers contact me with things like that. But one of them, like, I missed, but usually it's like, oh yeah, you're right, but pay attention to what happens next. You'll find out why. Right?
Yeah, that can happen. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So sometimes, something's changed and they just didn't see it until the next book comes out. Right. Yeah. And then they realize, oh, now I know what's different. But yeah, the readers, they really pay attention to this stuff. And I think that's part of the reason why I like having some Magic users where, while I don't expose all the rules to the readers, they can figure out a lot of it, but they're the more mysterious ones. They're the Magic users who appear and they're dark and mysterious or whatever, right? And then you've got the wizards who they have a clear set of rules, and and it's different, but that fits my narrative, and it's a story I want to tell. And I think that's the most important thing. How structured you are with them and how much you expose to the reader depends on the story you're telling.
Yeah.
I went to the original question. Before I started writing, I was on bed rest for 6 months due to some back issues. And so I basically read, and then I started building the world that I wanted to to write in when I could finally get out of bed. And so I spent 6 months building my cultures, and not all the, I did more than that, but building my cultures and, kind of outlining my limitations for my magic system, and just really detailing the world that I was building. I even did like family trees for 300 years worth of characters. So I did a lot of building my world before I started writing it, but I left room for interpretation. Like you said, there's some things that are tropey that you don't have to mess with. Those are comforting to the reader, but you still have to make it your own.
Yep.
Yeah.
So there's a great book by I'm trying to remember the guy's first name, but it's Dan Ilewski, House of Leaves. I don't know if anyone has come across House of Leaves. So House of Leaves you can read in about 4 different ways, because it's 4 different narratives that are juxtaposed over each other on the pages. Some of the pages are concrete poetry, some of the pages are all sorts of different. But one of the main threads of it is this thing called the Naverton Record, which is a narration of a series of videos, short home videos. It's basically a narration of what this person has found from these home videos. And they discover that this house that this man is living in is bigger on the inside than it is on the outside, but only by a few inches. And then as he starts to explore it more, these extra rooms start to appear, and then they start to change and shift, and he finds himself lost and he can't find the door to get back, and so on and so forth. And he's continually exploring to try and find, and actually there you flip this idea of understanding and rational, and you flipped it into the experience. So the room is never, the house is never explained. It is never explained in terms of why this all occurs, and it becomes more about the story of the character and how he comes to terms with his life issues and with the circumstances of the house and everything else. And then there's a counter narrative, and there's another counter narrative, and and so on. But it just it strikes me as that that gets to the essence of magic, something that is utterly unexplainable and baffling, and that fascinates me.
Yes, yeah, I agree with that. So what rich and realistic fantasy world to you guys? What makes a world that when you're reading or even writing in it feel like it's a real world? So Jeffrey, what do you think?
Wow. I mean, that's a good question. In the end, so as a reader, honestly, probably character is the most important thing to me. Mm-hmm. So in the end, it comes down to the characters. Like, the world is a touch point. The world is like the canvas that the characters are like dealing with, right? So it's the characters and how everything around them affects the way they act, what they believe, everything else, right? So it's the characters are always the most important thing of any book I read or write. So that's my answer.
What about you, Martha?
So yeah, I would start with the characters, but I also build their friends around them, whether they're, in the Lyric Chronicles, it's the people at the bar. She lives in a cottage behind a bar. It's an outdoor bar. So she's always having to walk by them, but you get to expose who she is by her interactions and how they grow. But also, magic is always tucked in there somewhere, and it's more fun too when it's occurring and the humans aren't aware, but the reader is. It's kind of like a little secret the reader gets to pocket, and then the small details that are slid in here and there that move things along but aren't waving a flag, I think makes it more fun because it builds and builds out the world. And in urban fantasy, the reason why we love that one is just the idea that maybe magic does exist and we're unaware of it. So when I can tuck in small details into the mundane, I mean, it's so much fun. Like, the guy in Starbucks does something weird that only a little kid notices. It's just fun.
What about you, Alan?
It's an interesting question. I think, I mean, the expectations of the genre, and the genre has a kind of, there is a lot of expectation associated with fantasy. The cultural code of fantasy is massively established, and actually, there's a weirdness to us using the term fantasy, really, because actually it's quite a lot of the time, many of the things that we talk about as fantasy, they have very strong similarities to each other. But for me, I think over the years of reviewing and reading different fantasy series, I think scenes have probably leapt out at me and have been poignant. So in the fact that we've all touched on this in slightly different ways in terms of slightly different answers. I have moments that I remember from different series that I've read. The Stephen Donaldson writing sword dueling in it's the second book of the Mirror of Her Dreams, 2-part that he wrote. It's an incredible sword fighting sequence. The dragon fighting sequence by Richard Knack when he was writing Legend of Humor. The same with Stephen Dias when he was writing the 3rd book in his Dragon series. I mean, those are they're breathtaking. There are just moments that you can kind of, and I rarely reread these days. And the reason I rarely reread is because, unfortunately, I get sent a lot of stuff to read. So I don't get a chance to. So I get, people want me to review new things. So these moments that you come back to, they kind of, they resonate. Anna Smith Spark did some incredible things with military warfare, and she said this in an interview, that she's really not very good at military tactics and that kind of knowledge. But you've got a sense in the battle scene between her 2 armies at the start of her first book, The Court of Broken Knives, that the armies were basically trying to eat each other. And I'd never read anything like that before, kind of personifying an army as if it was literally trying to consume the other, like they were trying to eat each other alive. And that kind of imagery was just powerful, because it was so vivid in terms of a different spin on how you would think of things. So I think those are kind of meaningful things of fantasy that I've found and appreciated.
Sounds like the interactions that happen. Yeah. So, in a way similar to what Jeffrey and Martha said about characters, but I like how you're bringing in the interacting in the world makes the world feel more tangible and richer.
Well, if we bring it down to, we can bring it down to location, we can bring it down to character, and we can bring it down to what happens, and and obviously all these 3 things are kind of tied together a little bit, aren't they? Because your character is always attached to where your character is and what they're doing, So
a realistic and multi-dimensional character can really highlight the differences in the world around them. So fantasy as a genre has been around for a long time, and there's so many different novels, different worlds. How do you keep your particular series fresh? How do you make yourself stand apart? We'll start with Alan this time.
So the last fantasy that I wrote was historical fantasy set in the 13th century. So that was based on Chaos Reborn. So that came out in 2016. I did a novel called Dreams of Chaos. And that was historically researched to the 13th century, to the schism, which was the point where the Catholic Church had 2 popes. So there was a pope in France, and there was a pope in Italy. And what I then did is took all the historical characters and basically inserted a magical premise to them, and inserted an idea of a sort of a Illuminati conspiracy behind things that were going on, and this struggle between different types of people, and connected that with with existing religion and so on and so forth. And I think there I was looking very specifically to try and play with characters we knew from history, and that was my attempt to create a difference. Before that, I'd written quite, the Wissamere series. I'd done 3 books of the Wissamere series. They're quite short books, and they were quite kind of traditional fantasy, set in a city rather than out in the wilderness. But you've got a dragon, and you've got a powerful
dragon
sword
in the city.
Yeah, and some guy stealing some gold, and stuff like that. So it's all quite, but at the same time, I needed to get those out in terms of I needed to know that I could do that, to then be able to do anything else, and I have something to set against. So, yeah, I do find, I certainly found with Dreams of Chaos that the historical aspect was the thing that was something that drove what I was trying to do, sort of fusing fantasy and history together.
What about you, Jeffrey?
Okay, well, I mentioned earlier, and I don't know if it's in this one or the previous panel I was on about tropes, right? But I think it's important where you establish, there are a bunch of norms in fantasy. You want to give the readers, especially I write epic fantasy, right? They expect certain things, right? But the things that are unique, for instance, in my Fate of Wizardom series, a wizardom, by the way, is a kingdom ruled by a wizard, right? So how does this happen? So the wizards are the 1%. And in this world, they have the power, they have the money, all the taxes go to fund their lavish lifestyles. And each wizardom is ruled by a wizard lord. Well, this wizard lord is gifted special abilities, making him much, much more powerful than anybody else, and is gifted by a god. And these wizard lords live for centuries, fed by this power, and they can heal, right? So if they get cut or poisoned, they can heal themselves instantly. Normally, a wizard cannot heal themselves at all. Only female wizards could maybe heal somebody else, but they can't heal themselves, right? So the rules get broken by these wizard lords. So to me, like that was the whole unique approach. And I'm like, okay, I've got these people in great power. They live for a long time. What are these people going to be like? Well, as time goes on, they live for centuries. They get less and less. Their humanity kind of goes away, right? Because they're super powered and they're above everybody, and right. So you get insight to these lives, and then the story takes place at a point where something happens where it starts breaking, and the wizard lords start dying off one after another for different reasons. But that is the story I'm telling, and then it leads to something, right? And in the end, like in order for that something to happen, you basically have to have no wizard lords. So like the narrative, the unique part, and the world, they all go together into one thing. Yeah, so that's what I did.
So what about you, Martha?
So I've had a lifelong habit of visiting places with everything I own. I like to move a lot. I'm trying to cut it out though. But I've always lived in big cities, New York, Chicago, New York, and you live in big cities, you're crammed in with people, you see all sorts of strange things. So like, for example, riding the subway in New York all the time, around 53rd on the east side, the tunnels for the trains are actually piled on top of each other. And there's particular stairs on I think it's the 53rd stop on the east side, where they're all open. So you can look down and see people 2 floors down crawling up the stairs. And that imagery stayed with me. And then I paired it in the Lyric Chronicles with, there are Starbucks everywhere, and sometimes they're like a block apart. Why is that? Why would they put them so close? And so I made it so that, and also in a coffee place, you never want to use the bathroom. It's just a pro tip for you. You won't use a bathroom when a lot of people are drinking coffee. So I had the magical people knew that back wall by the bathrooms was an entrance to the train system. And using what I'd seen with the New York subways, I put that in there. And so really basically, in order to stand out, I'm just trying to be myself. I have a snarky sense of humor. I love to read nonfiction, like on trees, and I put that in there. I'm reading about those. I like where spirituality and physics and nature cross each other. And so I'm just putting in what I would want to read. and with my weird sense of humor and from what I've observed and combining it together. Because frankly, I think the coolest kind of magic is where it has an element of actual truth. And apparently it's working. I don't know that you can purposely make yourself stand out, but I've seen that when people take from their own life what makes them kind of unique and put that in there, that's probably the best way to stand out. I do author notes also at the end of the book. Michael Anderle, who I write with a lot, he started it because a fan wrote something he didn't, well, it wasn't a fan. Someone wrote something kind of negative, and he wrote something negative back at the end of a book. And somehow it turned into author notes. And Michael's naturally very funny when he's writing about himself. I'm only funny in dialogue. So I just had to be myself, and I started writing about my life in more of a spiritual terms. And now people sometimes review the author notes on Amazon and not the book. And and that helped build a connection between me and readers. So, and you don't have to go do author notes, but it's really just kind of try and be yourself, and it'll happen maybe organically to a degree. And if you are yourself, first of all, it's sustainable. And secondly, readers can tell, and they will latch on to you because they think they are now your friends. When I meet fans, at first, I thought it was a conversation. They would talk, and then I would try to talk, and they would talk right over me as if I hadn't said anything. And it was startling, like, what's going on? And somebody else had to explain to me that they're not there to chat with you. They're there to tell you what the story meant to them, and to just kind of unload it. And you're just there to go, oh. And it gets a lot easier when you figure that one out. But that's because they've attached to you. And I think that's how you make yourself stand out. And just be, you figure out who you are, and let that be okay. However you've shown up in this world, let that be okay. And people will figure it out, and it'll all work out.
My partner had a funny story that's kind of related to that, in that Joanne Harris, author of Chocolat, author of many great fantasy novels. My partner's a huge fan of hers. We met her at a convention, and Karen wanted to get her book signed. So she got her book signed, and she went up to Joanne and said, I really love you, blah, blah, blah. Joanne signed her book. And then the two panels that were going on in the other rooms ended. So about 100 people came out into the auditorium, and so nobody could move. So Karen ended up stood next to Joanne Harris. And it was incredibly awkward because she didn't know what to say to her at all. And they kind of just sort of stood there. And then a year later, I was chairing FantasyCon here in the UK. We have an industry convention in the winter. And Joanne came for the final day. And we obviously went to go and see her and sort of say thank you so much for coming, and and she'd come for the awards and the other bits and pieces. And I reminded her of the occasion, and I said Karen felt so embarrassed, and Karen was there, and she was fine with me, kind of bringing it up and talking about it. And they got chatting, and Joanne said, I was completely starstruck by other people. When I first published, I got into a room and I saw so-and-so who'd been such an influence to me. And I absolutely went up to him and gushed and said this and said that, and then didn't know what to do with myself. And, so it completely happened. So it's very, very, these encounters are so, they're so precious. They are also, they are things that we have to be human about. We have to see the kind of the silliness of them, in some ways.
So touching on what Martha had said about putting bits of yourself into them. I have had an extraordinarily unlucky life when it comes to my health, and I was also hit vehicle versus pedestrian by a truck when I was 15. So like sometimes when I'm talking about my life, explaining the things that I've lived through, it almost sounds made up because I have been through so many different things, and yet I still overcome over and over again. And that's something that I use in my novels. Characters encountering things that just are horrific, but they find their own ways to, and every character is different. They all have their own personalities, so they all meet these obstacles and challenges in different ways, and it's how they face these things defines them and changes them in different ways. And some people just can't come back from the bad things, and some people who live with chronic pain just become bitter and mean. And then there are other people who just use that adversity in positive ways. So that's something that I have had. I've only been published since March, but even in that short time, the 2 novels that I've had come out, I've had people message me to tell me what it meant to see something that similar to that had happened to them, or just how that character inspired them in their own life.
Yeah, I think that's very powerful. The Fearless, which was my science fiction novel of 2020, has a disabled protagonist and a disabled main character, and that some of the ideas of that are, there are mobility condition issues in my life. There are people directly within my immediate life that suffer from very severe mobility conditions that can be periodic. They can be very severe at one point, and then they're different at another. But part of that identity is crucial in terms of what's there. And I think bringing some of those experiences into your writing, it does humanize your writing. It absolutely humanizes your writing.
It also shows that there's room for all of us, because we all have something different to bring. And also, I set out actually in urban fantasy to do what I called write recess, where you could pick it up and have a good time, and there's not going to be any angst that goes on longer than a chapter, and there's a lot of humor. And I had so Michael and I were trying to think of a sidekick in the Lyric Chronicles, and he said a troll. Michael's into D&D. I was not. So when he said troll, I thought troll. And I am a Star Trek fan, and I made a swearing troll, and I thought it was funny to name it Yumfuck Tiberius Troll. And he swears a lot because the main character swears a lot. Somebody asked her, do you swear all the time? And she said, not while I'm sleeping. And that's how the troll learns how to do it too. And so I was just trying to be funny. Then I started getting emails from people who have chronic pain or who've had a life experience that's been pretty hard. And one guy said he was told by the doctor not to do any exercise. And he had a pulmonary episode from laughing so hard at the troll. And so sometimes you set out to just do this thing because you think it's funny and it'll entertain people. And it has a far bigger effect than you can imagine, just because we all need to laugh and escape. So, just be yourself. Trust that you were set here for a reason, and whatever it is, there are people who are going to attach to it, and you're going to have more fun doing it if you're not trying to be something other than yourself. And you'll always be trying to fit yourself in a way that doesn't quite feel right. Yep. And, you do something goofy like a troll, and suddenly that's all everybody asks me about is, where's the troll?
It's funny that you mentioned, I think humor probably is not in epic fantasy often enough, because I make sure I put it in, but it's because I have this goofy sense of humor and I like writing snarky characters. But I get more comments about the humor than probably anything else, and it just comes up from time to time. It's not everywhere, but it's there. Yeah.
See, I can't do it. I did one short that I think was successful in terms of humor, which was about a poor woman at a wedding who ended up blackmailed by a fairy, a cigarette smoking fairy, to steal the engagement ring, and so she bit the engagement ring off the finger of the bride. And that was the only story, and it was mad, absolutely mad. It was basically the idea came, and I just ran with it. And the character of Wilma the fairy is just, she's just ridiculous. But generally speaking, I can't do humor. Compound humor is probably about my limit, and that usually comes out when I'm doing audio drama or something that's short, repeated sketches, because you do the same thing again and again, and it becomes funnier.
Right.
But one of the people who was an incredible inspiration to me before he passed, and I was the first person to adapt Reaper Man for the stage, which I did in 1995. And Terry Pratchett was someone who grew up. He lived probably 30 miles from my house where I grew up. He was incredibly involved in an amateur theatre company that was nearby where we were. And we did performances of all sorts of his plays. But when we did Reaper Man, because I directed that, so I'd acted in some of the others. But when we did Reaper Man, the adaptation process, going through line by line and working out all the different things that he was bringing into that text and how it worked, how he set a character apart by having that character speak in capital letters, and you can hear it. You know immediately what that voice sounds like because because of the way he's just literally used a different font essentially, or use caps. You know immediately that character has this kind of different thing, and that is just so clever when somebody can bring that kind of nuance to something and pull it all together. And let's face it, much as we probably read the kind of the origin and the systemization of Terry Pratchett's world, it's crazy, right? It's crazy. A turtle with 4 elephants on the back and a disc. It's nuts, and it's intentionally nuts. There's a satire to what he's trying to do to sort of indicate how crazy some of the world building mechanics can be, and how we will accept them if they're written in a particular tone. That's entirely fine. But that character, Death, written by Terry Pratchett, means more than probably many characters within the genre, and it resonates as soon as you start to think about the personification of death. That's where you go. And when the guy died, some of the eulogies, they've got him walking off with death as mates. That's the whole point. Then that somebody has created something so incredibly powerful. And I think what you were saying about there not being enough comedy in fantasy, I totally agree. And I think that's one of the reasons why Terry was able to, to tread the path, to forge a path that was so profound, for himself.
I do dry humor in my books. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Downton Abbey.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, with this accent, I have to be, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. So,
Obligated.
side note, my daughter, my 4.5-year-old, has insomnia. She has had it since birth. It is a side effect of the medication that they gave me to develop her when I was pregnant, because I had an injury and she had to be born early. So when my husband was deployed for 1.5 years, she basically slept in my room because I would go up and down the stairs like 5 and 6 times a night, and I couldn't do it physically. So I just made her a pallet in my room out of an old futon mattress. She just basically had a bed here. I refused to watch Disney all night long. I just couldn't do it. So my rule was, if she came in here, she would watch mommy shows. She got into Downton Abbey hardcore. She would sit here and talk about the characters like they were her friends. I think that the two of us watched all 6 seasons of Downton Abbey in the 1.5 years that my husband was gone about 6 times. All the way through, because I just turn it on when we would come in here at night, and we would watch like 5 or 6 episodes a night before she would finally, she would go to sleep for an hour and then she would wake up and I would turn it back on for her, so I could doze off.
So to relate that to the topic, to relate that to the topic a little bit, they obviously had to make a world, didn't they? In terms of what was there.
They did.
They've had to, and that suckered you in, absolutely, and I mean that in the best possible way.
Yes.
Because it's designed to, and I think that's incredibly rich.
And everything was so tangible.
Yeah, and the magic from it is I didn't grow up wealthy in an old English castle, so a lot of it seems like magic to me.
So I use in one of my classes on fantasy world building, I use EastEnders. Now we have EastEnders in the UK, which is one of our big soap operas. If you don't know it, it's on like 3-4 times a week.
My parents used to love to watch that. My late parents used to love to watch that.
So it's been on since the 80s, and it 3-4 times a week. It's half-hour episodes, and they go on, they do their stuff, and then the next one and so on. And you've got these interlinked stories with different characters and blah. But the one thing I always used to talk to the writers about in the student class was, how do you think the pub makes money? Look at how many customers it has during an episode. Do you think it actually? How come it doesn't go bankrupt? How does the washing service, the laundrette, how does that cope? Because there's only like 6 people that ever go in there. How does the shop continue to not close down? Because look at what they buy. People only ever seem to buy a bar of chocolate. Why is the point, once you get past those questions, you have a little bit of a giggle about some of the answers. The point there is that nobody cares. Yeah. The audience don't care, because it's a different brand of world building. It is a different brand of world building that we, probably as fantasy world builders, don't necessarily. It isn't. We don't look at the nuances in quite the same way. But most people who want to watch EastEnders, they come in from a long day. They're quite tired. They perhaps sit down. They've had their dinner or what have you, and they're just sat down chilling out. They put the telly on, and they're probably going to chat to each other while this thing is on. They might watch it avidly. Maybe you've got some audiences who absolutely glue in, but quite a lot of the time they're watching it, and then the advert goes on, and we have stats about this in the UK. The advert goes on, and they all go to the kitchen and make a cup of tea. Why? Because the national grid has to add power to the country's infrastructure, because every person in the country is known in that short bit to go and make a cup of tea at the end of the episode. It's actually Coronation Street is in the advert break. That's right. But we know that happens. We know that those things happen in terms of people watching it. But it is interesting to look in another genre to see how worlds work.
Yes.
And how people pay attention to very, very different things based on the
I
that
watched
different
Downton Abbey for the wardrobe.
Oh my goodness!
It was amazing.
I watched it because
I walk around in that kind of stuff all the time. Obviously, that's what we do in the UK. We all walk around.
Now, do you wear your dinner jacket or do you go full formal?
Well, I like that you all assume you'd be the upstairs and not the downstairs.
I didn't say I'd be either. You're perhaps presuming it could be that. To be fair, my family history is hilarious in that we go back to Charlemagne because we came over with William the Conqueror, and my tree goes all the way back to the 8th century. Came over William the Conqueror, and then we supported the wrong campaigner for the throne in the 17th century, had to buy our way out of execution, and then became blacksmiths, shepherds, woodcutters. So I am the stock of failed revolution.
Now, see, that would be great fantasy.
Awesome.
Right?
It
that
would
be
be.
great fantasy. Yeah.
Well, I did one little thing that I thought was a kind of poignant note to all of that. When I was doing the world design for Elite Dangerous, we had the opportunity to name a few things in the game. So there's a moon in Elite Dangerous, or an asteroid, or a kind of base called Warrenus, and Warrenus is the name of my 10th century ancestor who was a crossbowman who landed it on the beaches and fought King Harold and supported William the Conqueror to become King of England. So Warrenus de Lestrade, which translates as Warrenus from the marsh or Warrenus from the swamp. So I decided I had to immortalize him, so I named him in a computer game.
Oh,
the things you do.
Yeah. I need to go in a few minutes. Did you have a last question? And then I'll leave you all to the party.
What would your advice be to future writers?
Oh,
My advice would be to just keep writing. And I mean, that's what someone told me when I was young, a million years ago. And they were right. I've been writing for over 30 years. I had a national column in the newspapers back when there were newspapers. And it had 4 million readers a month. And I've written nonfiction that did well. And I didn't hit I was in trad land then, and I made enough to get by, but I didn't hit financially until indie land. And yet I don't regret any of it. It was all fun. Just keep writing. If you're doing this because you love to write and not because you're trying to somehow write a bestseller to get rich, just keep writing and having fun. Also, make friends with some writers who are like kind of at your level, just starting out. You'll kind of grow together. Abby Lynn Canor and I started in Indie Land together, and it's like we went to high school together in a way. And they'll be your peers forever, and they're the ones you can call when your book tanked or Amazon put the wrong cover on the right book or something. You can cheer each other up. You can meet at conventions like Long Lost, and and just understand there are going to be valleys. It's okay because it won't last forever. And when you hit a peak, enjoy it. It won't last forever either, and that's okay too. But just have a good time. If you're not having fun in this, why are you doing it?
Oh, I agree.
That's my advice.
So, Martha, why don't you tell everyone where we can find you on the internet?
Okay, so there's a Facebook group under my name, Martha Carr, and there's contests all the time, so it's fun. We have one for a stand mixer right now, if anybody. And there's an Or Saren Facebook group, and there's a lot of chit chat and fun that goes on in there in both of those. Amazon, you can find all the books, and most of them are on audio, and the rest will be soon if they're not. And I also answer all my emails. Thankfully, not thousands take me up on this, but I do actually answer them all. And you can find me at marthacarr.com as well. I mean, I'm pretty prevalent. And I've noticed too, by the way, that makes a big difference if you're trying to build an audience. I've watched writers who are as talented as I am, putting out books as often as I do, and they don't interact with their fans on Facebook, and they don't do as well. So anyway, just my last thought. I'm pretty easy to find. Thank you all. It was great meeting you guys.
This was awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I hope I get to see you when you're not a little square on a screen.
That would be nice.
Yeah.
I'm not doing 20 books this year, but I'm going to go next year.
All right. Well, look for it.
I will.
Okay. Nice to meet you all.
So,
then there were 3. Oh,
weird.
Now we are in column.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. So I'll let you guys answer that question. Your advice to future writers.
Okay.
You want to go first, Jeffrey?
Okay. Since this is a world building topic, that I'm going to give my advice in that area. And one of the biggest mistakes I see, because I've read a lot of epic fantasy. It's really all I've read for like 30 years, so or maybe longer. But I see people try to just push out all the world information up front, like you see these long expositions with just nothing's happening. You're just telling people about the world, and that is not the way to do it. I mean,
no.
It's better to dole it out in tiny little scoops as you tell the story. So have things happening, dialogue, blah blah blah, and a lot of that world building can happen in the dialogue. People have a conversation about something that's unique in the world. You don't have to just have these long paragraphs that describe things. Break it up. So let the reader just drink it in slowly, and then it'll be easier for them to swallow.
That's great advice. It's it's similar to the idea of you've got to earn it. You have to earn their interest. So you can't just give them, well, this is how this all works. You have to earn their interest, and you earn their interest by telling a story, not by giving them the mechanics and the kind of how everything is. And because you kind of end up with something stilted and sort of static, really, don't you? In terms of what's there.
Or you lose them because, you know, if they've read a quarter way into the book and hardly anything's happened, I mean, you're lucky you got them that far.
Mark Wolf in Building Imaginary Worlds describes that specific kind of writing as low resolution narrative. And what he says is that actually within world building, what you need is to start with, you do a lot of low resolution narrative. You do a lot of sketching everything out. And then what you do is that where you find the things that are important and are going to be necessary for the story, you turn them into high resolution narrative. You turn them into, you know, vivid pieces. You turn them into wonderful descriptions. You turn them into parts of the story that you're trying to tell. But yeah, he talks about this idea of low resolution narrative being a way to describe how we just, you know, how we get the treatment done, or how we get the synopsis done, or, you know, whatever we need to do to kind of just get there and then get on with the good stuff.
I like to think of it as, you know, you should see the world through the character's eyes. Instead of just having a big block of text, you should see the way that the character interacts with the world, the way they see the world, is how the world building should happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's very good. I think sometimes when you're dealing with something like a portal fantasy, for example, you know, you have that advantage of a ground, you know, in that you've got a person who maybe some of the strangeness of the fantasy that you're writing, they are unfamiliar with it. So essentially they are becoming familiar with it as the reader's becoming familiar with it, which is quite a nice device to play with. You know, there are a variety of ways in which you can kind of make that palatable, aren't there?
That's the, like, eyes through a stranger in a strange land.
Yeah, very much so, very much so. Shall I do a piece of advice then? Shall I see if... okay, so just a general writing piece is rejection. You know, rejection is hard, and it's going to be there, and it's all right to feel bad, and it's all right to feel hurt, and it's all right to take time when somebody, you know, and when people tell you, oh, it's okay, send it back out, you know, get it, you know, just get back out there. That's nice, and that's very well meaning, but it is also okay to sit and go, you know what, I'm going to take a bit of time and reflect on this, you know, in terms of what's there, but don't let it stop you. I think to echo Martha, you know, rejection shouldn't stop you. I went through a couple of years when I got a particular critique, when I wasn't ready to be able to deal with that critique. You know, that book, I didn't have the writing chops to be able to fix that book, and so it knocked my confidence. You know, and I probably didn't write between sort of 2008 and 2010. I probably didn't write anything because I didn't feel confident. I was still teaching writing at the time, but I didn't feel confident in my own work. So you can't get there. You've got to, you know, your path has to be your path, and you can't let other people, you know, kind of knock you off of it in terms of what's there. Take on board what you can use, you know, great. And if anything I've said today is something you disagree with, fantastic. You know, that means it's not something you can use. You know, that's entirely fine too. And I will just make the final plea related to what we're talking about here. You've got to make room for the reader.
Yes.
You know, Philip Pullman says, these are my books. I tell you where everything is going to go. This is where it's going. I don't agree with Philip Pullman. I like this idea. I want to touch in sense of the imagination. I want to hit the imagination of a young child like me who read Lord of the Rings for the first time and then went to bed and dreamed about Lord of the Rings. I want to be able to do that. And if you can inspire somebody, you know, one person doesn't mean, you know, you've sold thousands and thousands of books or hundreds or tens or whatever. If you can inspire one person like that, you win.
That was one of the most flattering things that I had ever heard. My editor, who has obviously edited tons and tons of books, messaged me one morning and said, I dreamed about your characters last night. And I mean, for an editor who this is her job, is to spend time in other people's worlds, to dream about my characters. That's pretty awesome.
We're fragile souls, aren't we? You know, if you
We
think
are.
about it, I mean, you know, I got, you know, I can kind of liken to that. The editor for my SF novel last year, when he came back with his comments on it, you know, you sit there feeling like you're 12 feet tall for about 4 or 5 days, and then you start, or at least I did, and then I started sitting and thinking, you know, maybe I'm being too arrogant. Maybe I'm being, you know, am I kind of coming across as smug at the moment because I feel really good about myself? You know, what's going on? So yeah, you know, writers are fragile people, and sometimes you need that praise. And it's not just from, you know, it can be from the most random, you know, review, or from the most random thing. And, you know, they sometimes say, don't read your reviews, and, you know, and don't this and don't that. It's up to you, you know, you make the choices you want to. But if you get that nugget of something and they come back and go, I love it. And it's someone that either means something to you or something else, you kind of go, okay, that keeps me going. You know, that keeps the light on. That keeps the typing, you know. It's good.
So to touch on what you said earlier about rejection. So I wrote my first book, From the Ashes, over a period of like 6 years. I was not consistent with the writing. I was terribly sick at the time, so I just wrote when I could. Hi, person in the background.
That'd be Karen. I don't know what she wants.
Hi, Karen.
What's up?
Okay, I was just checking for the cat.
Okay, no, the cat's not in there. That's fine. She's checking for the cat. She's just medicating the cats this evening, so she's just looking to see if Winifred was in it.
So it was over edited because I would come back to it, and some of the writing in some places was great, and some of it was really, really clunky. And I actually got told by one of the writers that I admire most in this world. She's like, it's got good bones, but you need to do this exercise. And she had me rewrite the prologue from memory and send it to her. Total game changer. I had written the first maybe 20,000 words before my husband deployed, and then I wrote the rest of the book while he was gone. And it was just so different. And I had written it in first person and then gotten the advice from Amy Duboff to change it to third person. And it was just so hard to let go of this thing that I had done. But when I did it, it was a brand new book, and it was good. I mean, I had questioned whether I was doing the right thing because I'd gotten so many rejections. And
I mean, writing's a skill. I mean, and it's like golfing. The more you golf, you're going to get better and better. I mean, you're going to level off at some point, but you can't go out once a year and expect to do well, right? So but you find that by the time you wrote the whole book, when you go back and you start it again, you were better. You were a better writer, right?
And
yes, I was.
You improve the most over your first, million words, right? And then it like levels, but
yeah. And I would say you're going back to that, that point that you're making there, Jeffrey, about levels. You know, there's a level that you get to when you're good enough. I mean, there are individual things. There are, you hit the publisher at the right time. You hit the agent at the right time. They're looking for a specific thing. Luck. You're able to pitch it right. And so on and so forth. All of those things kind of, can happen well or badly or anything else. But once you get to a level where you're good enough, then after that, it is just about those bits. And sometimes we can be very introspective and kind of go, oh, do I need to completely redo everything? And you're like, no, maybe you don't. Actually, interestingly, so Amy's first book, she sent to me because I was reviewing an SF book, and she sent it to me as one of the, because I made it my mission when I was reviewing over there to, and I still do occasionally, to review everything, as in, I wasn't just taking big publisher stuff. I was taking self-pubs, and I would take a selection, in terms of what's there. And I read it, and I then sent her notes. Similar to, the fact she sent you notes, I sent her notes. And, we've talked about that since. And, and she's come back and gone, yeah, actually, that was so helpful, in terms of how that, and, great, job done. I'm not, and then an anthology came up where somebody said, "Oh, I'm looking for people to write this, this, and this," and I just went, "Well, Amy." You know, and so I recommended her to a short story publisher, and you know, and that went well. And you would hope that you know, if something else comes up, I'd you know, check it in her direction at some point. You know, when an opportunity arises. So yeah, it's all like that. You know, it all kind of happens.
Isn't it amazing how we as writers build these communities, these, you know, these tribes, and I just think it's, especially in the indie world, that just the camaraderie that we have, you know, we don't see each other as competition. I think we see each other as
right.
Yeah,
it's awesome. It's one of my favorite things about being an author.
Just to go back to the comparisons of starting out. So I was querying in 2001, and I didn't get any positive responses.
I was in high school.
So I didn't get any positive responses at all until 2013.
Oh, wow.
So my first book was trash, and it's still trash, as in there's about 200,000 words worth of rubbish in an attic box that I have tried to rewrite 3 or 4 different times. And, you know, and I still can't, you know, you can only polish the contents of the toilet so many times. And it really doesn't work for you. Yeah. So, you know, and I was querying at the time when I started querying, we still had the Writers and Artists Yearbook that you religiously bought every year, and you went through, and I was told it was bad form to query multiples. So I would send out my submission all printed out, and off it would go. And I'd wait 6 weeks, and then I'd send out the next one. And so, of course, it takes you 2 years to get round to everybody, and then by that time, everyone's forgotten who you are anyway. So you go back to the beginning, you know, and you've changed the book, and you've changed that. You know, I mean, you know, I was a dreadful writer, and you know, I look back at some of that stuff, you know, some of the things and the mistakes that I made, and I then look at, you know, students I teach or writers that I engage with, and you kind of go, I want you to have an easier path. I want it to be quicker for you. I want you not to make the stupid mistakes that I made. And also, then when there are 1 or 2 good things that I did, like, I don't know, reject the vanity publishing deal that they were trying to sell me. I did that. Yeah, you know, I mean, you know, we can all tip and go, yeah, watch out for these people and watch out for these people. And then take a publisher to court because he didn't pay me the royalties that were in the contract and win. You know, those kind of things. Don't be afraid of the legalese. Don't be afraid of the, you know, the different things that you have to do sometimes, you know, to defend your creativity. All of those things are incredibly important. And if anything, by listening to other writers, by talking to other writers, by just getting 5 or 10 minutes to kind of spitball a load of stuff, if anything of that helps someone, it's good. You know, it's positive. You pay it forward, don't you?
I have a Discord server actually that's for my fans and stuff, and I use it to sprint. So they get to watch me and see my word count and stuff. And there's a couple of people in that group that are aspiring writers that, you know, they ask me for advice, and, you know, they'll spitball their ideas. I actually have a channel for them to just talk about their stuff, their works in progress. And it's just so much fun when, you know, these other people that are just working towards their dream, that haven't even gotten as far as I have to get, you know, I have 2 books out. I feel like a baby author sometimes, and they look up to me. And I love when they jump in and they write with me. It's just,
that's great.
It's so much fun.
That's great. Hey, I'm running out of time here. So
I think well, why don't we go ahead and close this one up? So Jeffrey, if you want to tell us where we can find you.
Okay. Yeah, you can. My name here. Let's see if I can touch it. Yeah, jeffreylkohanek.com. Right, is my website, so you can see all my books and links to all the stores there. You'll find my ebooks, all my ebooks on Amazon. My older ones are on all the other stores as well. And then I have audiobooks, and print is everywhere. So Yeah. So if you like epic fantasy and you want it on like the fun and hopeful side, so not the dark and nasty and brutal side, like that's not me. I'm just fun epic fantasy. Yeah.
And Alan?
Well, I'm over at alanstroud.com, obviously with the E, but that's the only kind of thing that you need to worry about. Or you can go to the British Science Fiction Association website, which is bsfa.co.uk. That gets to me because I'm the chair of the British Science Fiction Association. So, chair at bsfa.co.uk gets to me as just as easily as anything else. And you can find some of my stuff on Phoenix Point, the computer game. You can see some stuff there. I did a little bit of writing for Larian for Baldur's Gate 3, but I doubt any of it will feature. I worked a little bit on Elite Dangerous, so you can see some of the stuff at Lave Radio. So we do a regular podcast there. We're about to hopefully run a convention in 2 weeks. An in-person convention for a computer game. Ooh. I have a feeling that on Monday they're going to announce extra lockdown measures in the UK. So I think that we might be moving to online, but we'll have to see. So we don't know till Monday. But we're in the middle of sort of organising all of that. But my latest book was science fiction, which is Fearless. You can find that on Amazon. You can find it, at other places, published by Flame Tree Press. And the sequel has just been bought. So we are currently discussing when it's going to be published in 2022. Awesome.
Well, you can find me on Amazon. You can also find me at www.christinagruel.com. I'm on both Amazon and I've got Kindle Unlimited as well. And that's about it. I think we'll go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you for joining the fantasy world building and our other tangents that we went off on. This has been so far my favorite panel that I've done today. So thank you guys for joining us.
Yep. Good night, folks.
Hey, if you like that panel and you're looking to continue your author journey,
or if you're just looking for a group of like-minded people,
all striving to improve their craft and grow as authors, our community at KSM might just be what you're looking
for some reading, writing, and everything in between.
Come on over and join us at Keystroke Medium.